Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Rocket Summer, an inaugural BookTube event invented by Michael K. Vaughan to celebrate classic science fiction in the month of July. The dog days of July, when all you feel like doing, if you're a certain kind of reader, is reading science fiction or rereading science fiction. Uh, Something about it. I don't know how many people share this, but to me, epic fantasy is for the cold winter months, at least the months that used to be cold. And science fiction is for the endless afternoons of summer. I don't know. I have no idea how many of those endless afternoons I spent just leisurely reading, just leisurely reading at the down at the end of the field on the border underneath the shade of the trees, within sound, within the distance close enough so that you could hear the brook, with my dogs all around me and my head just leaning back on the belly of a pig. just a, just as peaceful as could be, reading all the live long day science fiction. And Rocket Summer has a structure to it. Uh, we are reading everything prior to 1970. So the first week would be the very beginnings of science fiction. Then we move on to the 40s and the 50s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and then we end up in the 1960s. 1970 is the cutoff date, so the last week of July will be the 1960s. And I'm one of the co-hosts of this event, and I'm still not behaving. I'm still not behaving at all. Last night, I reread Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein from 1961. Again, like a couple of other books that I've been dealing with this month, widely regarded as this author's masterpiece, also widely regarded as a great science fiction novel. That evaluation of this particular book in the last 3 decades or so, has been undercut and questioned and even downgraded by some of the fixed attitudes of the time, I guess we could euphemistically put it, that are all over this book. Sexism, for instance. I heard all of that kind of criticism, and I leveled a lot of it against Stranger in a Strange Land myself, rather than reread the book. I thought, well, your first 2 readings were fine, and certainly your memory of this book aligns with that later criticism. I reread this last night for Rocket Summer with the freshest slate I have ever brought to this book. And all of that criticism, all of that new wave feminism criticism of this book is wrong. All of it is. There's nothing like that here. One character is like that. One character is like that. There's a character named Jubal Harshaw. He's one of the 2 main characters in this book. And he is a gruff, opinionated, egotistical sexist who is nevertheless completely fair, or more so, to his female employees, all of whom know what he's like and love him anyway. At every turn, Heinlein is using the lingo of brutish sexism and then undercutting it. So I felt like a fool. First 100 pages of this book, I felt like an absolute fool. Not because I wasn't enjoying it, I'll get to that, but because I fell for it, because I fell for the hysteria, and I shouldn't have. There's nothing like that in this book. Not any degree greater than any other novel that came out in the early 1960s. I would argue less, because this is far, far more self-aware. This is the story of a Earth mission that goes to Mars, the planet Mars, and they're never heard from again. And then much later, another Earth mission goes not only to visit Mars, but also to see what happened to that first mission. And they discover a survivor of that mission. They discover a young man named Valentine Michael Smith, who was raised on Mars by Martians, by Martian creatures who have a pronounced sexual dimorphism. I imagine it's done so tongue-in-cheek. I don't know how I could ever have taken it seriously, but I imagine that also was fodder for feminist critique of this book. Not that I'm degrading the feminists of the early 1960s. They had plenty to work with. They had plenty to be upset about. I just, and I listened when they were upset. I listened when feminists that I knew in the early 1960s told me about their work conditions, their ridiculously uneven pay scales, their condescension in every aspect of life, their inability to have a checking account of their own. I listened. I hadn't known that it was that bad, and then I did. I made the mistake of listening when it comes to the one area of expertise I have in the human world, and that is books. But anyway, to get back to the story, the Earth expedition brings Valentine Michael Smith back to Earth as the man from Mars. He is suddenly a spectacle and the possession of the U.S. government, trying to figure out who he is, what he is, but he, as we're told early on in the book, he might look human, but he's entirely Martian. He was raised by alien beings. Alien beings who live on Mars. So 1961 was just about as late as you could write a book where anything like that was even remotely possible. There is no life on Mars. On the surface, anyway, there is no life on Mars of any kind. Spiritual or not, energy-based or not, nothing. There's nothing there at all. It's a barren rock, swept by lethal radiation every minute of every day. And bitterly cold. Unbelievably cold. So, this was just about at the end of that era. There wasn't much that you could do with that kind of a Mars after this book. But Valentine Michael Smith has no conception of human values or societal customs or whatnot. And the government doesn't seem in a hurry to introduce him to those things. They're mainly interested in finding out what he is, whether or not he's a danger, finding out whether or not he's a toehold against the Martians themselves, who may be more powerful than Earth's military. It's only when an enterprising character breaks him out of the military's control and gets him out into the world that the Valentine Michael Smith, that Mike Smith starts to see more of what Earth is like and acclimate to it. Starts to acclimate to it. Keep in mind, his body grew up in a fraction of Earth's gravity. So the first thing he has to agonizingly adapt to is the higher gravity on Earth. But then, as he adapts, he quickly comes to the home of a character named Jubal Hershaw, who is everything. He is everything. He's a doctor. He's a lawyer. He's an internationally known figure. He's a best-selling author. He tosses off potboilerly tripe under a half a dozen pseudonyms. Little bit of a self-insert there on the part of our author. Valentine Michael Smith eventually makes his way to Jubal Hershaw's unconventional house, with his unconventional friends and family coming and going all the time. And they get to know what he's like, and it's pretty amazing. It's not just that he was raised by Martians, it's that he has superpowers that humans don't have. One of his superpowers is not a superpower. It's actually available to pretty much anyone. It's the thing that is on this famous vintage cover, to grok something. This became a signature of the 1960s. Do you grok this? Which is more than just do you understand it. And it's certainly more than do you like it. It's a weird sexual enlightenment of both those things combined. To grok something is to be not only aware of its totality and existence, but a part of its totality and existence. Heinlein does a great job describing it, as he does with everything in this book. But again, we'll be coming to that. But in addition to that, Valentine Michael Smith, although he doesn't make a big deal out of it, he has complete control over his own physiology. He can turn his body on or off. And he can make things go away. He can make them disappear. He can collapse their wave function, I guess you would call it in the 21st century, so that they just vanish, and they can't come back. That's not how it works. They can't come back because they aren't anywhere anymore. They're just gone. They never happened. They never existed. He can also freeze things in motion. Well, it's a little tiring for him at first. And seems to develop extrasensory abilities as well. All while under the rough guidance of Jubal Harshaw and the women who work for him and who are his friends and his factotums. And the novel takes off from there. Of course, the government wants their alien back. But also, Valentine Michael Smith wants to pursue a path of his own, which naturally, since he has supernatural abilities and is attractive and is otherworldly, takes the form of a revivalist movement, a religious movement, with him at its center. And with Jubal Hershaw, much against his will, drafted as a kind of John the Baptist figure, the father of this weird alien being, even though Jubal Hershaw is a celebrated and extremely proud cantankerous atheist. And the story moves on from there. Valentine Michael Smith becomes a social sensation, not just for being the man from Mars, but now being a quasi-religious inspirational figure of a type that were starting to crowd the landscapes when Heinlein was writing this book. And the ending, there are a couple of endings here, and they are pretty predictable, I think, by the halfway point. Once you know the direction that Heinlein is taking the story in, I think you'll be able to predict what's going to happen. And to me, it absolutely didn't matter at all. I felt like I was reading this for the first time. What a book. What an endlessly smart book. First of all, so much smarter and more literary and elusive, ALL, not ALU, and more literary and referential of other literature than all of Heinlein's earlier books put together. Heinlein was insanely prolific. This is, I don't even know, his 20th book, something like that. At the time that this came out, all the critics mentioned, well, how good can it be? He writes a novel all the time. This is so much better than anything that came before it. I will now reread a lot of the stuff that came before this, but I know it from memory. And not only that, but what fun this book is. Good Lord, it's laugh out loud funny. All the way to the end, it's laugh out loud funny. And the social satire, the satirical insights, oh my God, they're wonderful. I don't know. I think I failed this book twice. When I originally read it, I thought, okay, I want The Day the Earth Stood Still. If we're getting a lone alien with superpowers on Earth, I want something more than this. What are you doing with this? This kind of counterculture humor. I don't want to read a social satire. I'm reading science fiction. How dumb a thought was that, considering what science fiction is and always has been. But then my second reading was informed by that cloud of resentment around this book. I don't think I've given this book, believe it or not, even though it's Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein, an absolute pillar of science fiction, I don't think I'd given it a fair shot until last night. All this time, 2024. And boy, am I glad I did. What a book. What a smart, wise, hilarious book. I loved it. So my Rocket Summer, this is a highlight, definitely. So far, I am not, for Rocket Summer, reading I'm not reading any Brand X stuff. So far, I've been reading books that are well known in the science fiction world. Not my plan. It was just random chance. This came under my hand last night, and I was actually shifting around a whole bunch of Ace Double, old 35-cent science fiction volumes that I was buying all year long and throwing on a pile for Rocket Summer. I was shifting around some of those books when this copy just showed up. It was just the next thing that my hand touched, and I thought, wait a minute, that fits the time frame. That's before 1970. Reread The Stranger in a Strange Land. Boy, am I glad I did. Oh, boy, am I glad I did. So, there you go. A big surprise for me. That is my Rocket Summer adventure continuing with a reread of Stranger in a Strange Land that feels like my first read of it. Fantastic. What a gift. So, I'll move on next time. We'll see what it is next time, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.